Good evening, everybody. I would like to welcome you to this UROTECH forum webinar. Would like to share first my screen and then we can start. Okay, so here it is. So this is a UROTECH forum sponsored by Medtronic, and which is entitled Meet the InterStim X, the next generation of the preferred choice for sacral neuromodulation therapy. This is the UROTECH forum schedule. I just wanted to remind you that your questions can be asked through the Q&A box, and then we will collect some of them and comment on them. Just a reminder also that this UROTECH forum is not accredited. The recording will be uploaded on our ASU YouTube channel within 48 hours. We will start first with a presentation of the InterStim X system, and then we will discuss with the panel. This is our conflicts of interest of all the speakers. And just to introduce our panelists this evening, first of all, we will welcome Gillian McDonald. She is a senior system engineer from Medtronic in Minneapolis, and her work focuses on the pelvic health portfolio, including the launch of Medtronic's latest recharge-free sacral neuromodulation system, which is InterStim X. And prior to this, she received her PhD in mechanical engineering from the University of Minnesota, with a specific focus on medical robotics and devices. We will also welcome Professor Stefan de Wachter. You all know him. He is a full professor of urology at Antwerp University in Belgium. He is chairman of the department, section editor of the Neuromodulation Journal, member of a global expert panel on neuromodulation, and also KOL in pelvic floor disorders. And myself, I am a urologist based in Paris, Sorbonne University, Internal Academic Hospital. I'm an ASU board member and a panel member of the EU Female LUTS Guidelines, associate editor of European Urology Open Science, and also ex-chairperson of the Young Academic Urology Functional Urology Group. So since its CE mark in 1994, you know that the InterStim system went through significant improvements in terms of innovation. And it's currently and actually the most used and clinically proven sacral neuromodulation therapy. And this evening, we would like to introduce you the InterStim X, which is the next generation recharge-free system with an estimated battery lifespan of up to 15 years, and which is supported by the SureScan MRI technology. So without any delay, I would like Gillian to do her presentation on the system. Thank you, Gillian. Good evening.
All right. Thank you so much. Let me know if you're unable to see my screen or hear my voice at all, but thanks for having me. I'm Gillian. As Professor Fay mentioned, I'm a senior systems engineer at Medtronic. And in case you aren't familiar maybe with the role systems engineers play in day-to-day life of medical devices and systems, a big chunk of my job is actually interacting with you all, the clinicians, along with our patients and our field staff, to get your feedback about what you like, don't like, what you might want to see in future systems. And then ultimately, with all of that input gathered, I bring that to our technical team so that we can work on development of our commercial systems, not only of what we're launching today and what I'll be talking about with InterStim X, but also what comes in the future. So again, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk with you all about InterStim X today. At a high level, here's the plan for what I want to touch on. I want to re-show that timeline slide that Professor Fay showed, just to kind of touch on the overall portfolio of innovation that Medtronic has created over the last 25 plus years. A majority of the talk will be spent on InterStim X. What is it? What's new? Why should you care for your own practice and patients? And then we'll wrap up just by discussing other roads to relief, specifically in our chronic therapy with the rechargeable InterStim Micro system. So to bring up this timeline of innovation, once again, I just want to touch on a few points throughout this, because I know it might seem like, hey, Medtronic in the S&M space, you know, what has been occurring aside from these big launches that we've seen over the past few years with InterStim Micro and InterStim X. And I like this slide because you can see kind of how we started developing this space from a commercial standpoint, with our early innovations being focused on expanding our labeled indications, introducing timed leads to the sacral neuromodulation space, coming out in 2006 with InterStim 2, and then fast forward to the last few years where we've really increased our pace of innovation and impact with the InterStim Micro approval in 2020, and most recently InterStim X in 2023. So with that overview, let's jump into it. As you heard, InterStim X is our latest innovation in recharge-free technology for sacral neuromodulation. And if you take one thing away from today, I hope you remember that the InterStim X system is labeled for over a 10-year expected lifetime. Again, that's for expected therapy settings and telemetry use. And for patients that are programmed to lower energy settings, the system may last up to 15 years. And so throughout today, I'll mainly be focused on this neurostimulator right here. You might refer to it in your practice as the battery. You might refer to it as the device, the INS. That's what I'm talking about when I say the neurostimulator, which I'm sure you all know. Along with that, part of our InterStim X system includes this communicator to assist with sending messages between the handset and the device. And then, of course, we have the therapy apps that are actually hosted on the handset, which we often refer to at Medtronic as the smart programmer. So with that background, what's actually new with InterStim X, and what's contributing to the longevity of 10 to 15 years? For those that are familiar and implant quite a few InterStim 2 INSs, you probably will notice from this picture that InterStim X looks nearly identical to InterStim 2, aside from the etching on the can itself. And we kept the body the same as InterStim 2 actually, but the majority of the updates were to the interior of the device. Two key things specifically, which we'll get more into. But on the inside, we've updated the electronics and we've updated the battery chemistry. And those two things are kind of the 1-2 punch that give us our improved longevity. Just as a baseline, as I'm going through this presentation, with this 10 to 15 year longevity, that's comparing to our predicate InterStim 2 device with a labeled lifetime of around 4 to 6 or 4 to 7 years, depending on the therapy settings. All right, so jumping into it, what about the electronics is unique? What do they offer? Again, why should you care? The first thing I want to point out is that InterStim X and its associated electronics brings consistency across the InterStim platform. So whereas InterStim 2 was at constant voltage therapy output, InterStim X is constant current, just like the Verify external neurostimulator, as well as the InterStim Micro rechargeable neurostimulator. So you no longer have to worry about going from constant current programming during a trial and then mapping that to constant voltage. Everything across the board is constant current now. Beyond the consistency, the biggest contributor to efficiency is these updated electronics. And More specifically, these electronics are more efficient at managing power compared to InterStim 2 because we essentially made them smarter. We introduced an MCU, or a more advanced system control architecture. And what that allows us to do is basically reduce the amount of current or energy being used by kind of day-to-day operations like keeping a clock or accessing memory. And we're able to make those more efficient. And then finally, when I say we made the INS smarter, this is what I mean. We introduced onboard memory and storage of up to 11 programs, which is consistent with InterStim Micro, but was not offered with InterStim 2 previously. And what this means for you and your patients is that patients can switch to a new programmer. Let's say they lose it or they damage it. They can make that switch to a new programmer without actually losing their therapy settings and their stored programs, just to save time ultimately so that they don't need to be reprogrammed. Okay, so that was the electronics, but I mentioned the other major update to the INS itself was the updated battery chemistry. The updated chemistry is 5th generation patented battery chemistry manufactured exclusively by Medtronic. And when I say 5th generation, I mean specifically for our sacral neuromodulation devices, just showing again that we're innovating and iterating to make sure that you and your patients have the latest and best technology that's the best fit to go with the electronics. The other benefit with this specific battery chemistry is that we're leveraging the reliability of the chemistry used in our Medtronic pacemakers. Specifically, as you can see on the screen, that the Azure and Micra family of pacemakers. This specific chemistry has a long name. It's called lithium fluorinated carbon silver vanadium oxide chemistry, which sounds very long. But ultimately what that means is that we've adjusted the chemistry so that it's the right fit for the updated electronics. It's able to handle any demand that the electronics need so that patients continue to receive reliable therapy, and we're squeezing out as much longevity from the device as possible. Okay, so there's more to a system beyond just the neurostimulator itself. Along with the new neurostimulator, we also launched new InterStim X therapy apps with the introduction of this system. So what should you know about it? You may be familiar already with this smart programmer and the associated apps that exist for InterStim Micro, InterStim 2, and the ENS. And the benefit is that we kept it very similar to those. So we are still maintaining a clear and visible digital display, not just for patients, but also for you and your staff as you program these patients. The InterStim X apps are still hosted by the smart programmer that hosts the other InterStim apps. So it's a single intuitive platform to manage therapy. You should also know that we've updated the impedance measurement that's performed compared to the InterStim 2 system. Part of this was due to the switch to new electronics and constant current. And in doing so, we essentially streamlined the process for taking an impedance measurement. So it's more accurate than what InterStim 2 offers. It's also run at an amplitude that's approximately 1,000 times smaller than expected therapy settings. So hopefully there shouldn't be any reason why a patient would be feeling the stimulation during an impedance check. And then also the parameters that are used for that check are automatically populated. So you or your staff who do the programming don't have to go in and adjust those settings each time. And then finally, if in your practice you enjoy, looking at that usage graph or the usage report to see, hey, what were my patients using for programs and amplitude? How frequently were they switching? Was their therapy even on? You're able to access all of that information on this smart programmer still for up to 30 days of programming history. All right, those were the key points for InterStim-X. We can definitely talk more about the details in more depth during the Q&A. But I'm going to switch gears a little bit here to talk about the other side of our chronic therapy, and specifically our rechargeable InterStim Micro system that we received approval for in 2020. So, especially with the introduction of InterStim-X, its improved longevity, patients now have a more even playing field, or more level playing field, when they're choosing between a rechargeable or recharge-free system. The benefit is that you can help them now choose which system is most appropriate and best fits their lifestyle. So maybe they're a patient who doesn't appreciate technology, maybe is a little bit intimidated by it, and doesn't want to have to maintain their therapy with a recharger every so often. Those patients who like that simplicity and ease of a recharge-free device might be best fit for the InterStim-X. But on the other side, for patients who may benefit from a smaller device, maybe they are young or they have a low BMI and they don't want a device that's 12.5 cubic centimeters, they may benefit from the rechargeable InterStim Micro. The good news is that both systems that are equipped with the SureScan MRI technology give patients access to conditional full body MRI scans. So with that overview, let's go into the InterStim Micro a little bit. This might be a refresher for some of you who are very familiar with it. Others, maybe this is new information. So with the InterStim Micro, again, it's a rechargeable system that's labeled to a 15-year lifespan. So because it's rechargeable, it means that no matter what, unless something unexpected occurs, right, patients can expect a 15-year life from their device. And when that 15 years is hit, they'll see a notification that they should talk to you and discuss getting it replaced, but it does not mean that their therapy stops right at 15 years. It means that they get that notification to see you and talk about the next steps. So what are the key features of InterStim Micro and what it can deliver for you and your patients? The first that I like to touch on always is that it's the smallest available S&M device, coming in at 2.8 cubic centimeters. So again, if size is an issue, this might be a good option for your smaller patients. And perhaps the biggest feature that I like to focus on is the fact that InterStim Micro offers zero fade over 15 years of therapy delivery, because its battery technology is something that we call overdrive, which is a lithium titanate based chemistry. When I give this kind of feature talk, I like to bring up the analogy of, asking how many patients or how many of you in the audience have had a cell phone or some sort of rechargeable consumable device that the longer you have it, the more frequently you seem to have to recharge it. And the charge doesn't last as long and you're stuck just constantly kind of in that repeated cycle. That's because the battery capacity over time is fading more and more with traditional lithium-ion batteries. But with the overdrive battery technology, that fade is reduced to zero for the InterStim Micro specifically and its use cases. So patients don't have to worry about that fade occurring throughout the lifetime of the device. Again, as I've touched on and we'll touch on in the next slide, InterStim Micro is compatible and eligible for full body MRI with the SureScan technology, and ultimately is designed to deliver the same effective results as our recharge-free or primary cell devices like InterStim-X. And so this is my second to last slide, but I just want to spend, I've brought it up probably 5 times by now about this MRI technology and eligibility for a full body scan. But I like to end on this slide because we've invested over 20 years of MRI research to not only make sure that patient safety is at the top of our list in terms of priorities, but also because we've been able to streamline the MRI scan process for patients, technicians, and clinical staff. What do I mean by streamline the process? Well, one, which will be big for your patients, potentially, is that with SureScan MRI technology, we don't require impedance checks prior to MRI scans. So there isn't an impedance check disqualifier that they have to worry about prior to getting their scan. MRI mode is also easy to activate on a smart programmer. So the patient, or more specifically the MRI technician, can go in, activate MRI mode, make sure they understand the patient's eligibility for certain scan parameters, and at the end of the scan, they can easily deactivate MRI mode and resume therapy. And finally, again, all Medtronic InterStim systems that are equipped with the SureScan technology have the same MRI condition. So hopefully we're moving toward simplifying this for you and your practice. So I'll wrap up here with all of that technical talk. What does this ultimately mean for you and your patients? And I'd love to hear some more from this audience in the Q&A. But ultimately, with the introduction of InterStim X, we're offering improved patient choice. Again, leveling the playing field between, hey, instead of choosing, do I want a device that lasts 4 to 7 years or a 15-year rechargeable device, we now can offer a 10 to 15-year versus a 15-year device, which I think is a big, important piece of information for your patients as they're making that decision, and hopefully will lead to fewer revisions throughout their lifetime. Finally, InterStim X isn't, introducing anything revolutionary or changing in terms of what you're already familiar with. So I want to make sure that we emphasize that InterStim X is able to maintain the familiar implant procedure and app workflows that you may already be familiar with InterStim 2 and InterStim Micro. And of course, the MRI technology piece. So with that, I will wrap it up. Thank you so much for listening. I look forward to our discussion. And I'll end with this regulatory statement before I turn it over. Thank you.
Thank you, Gillian, for this very nice and exciting presentation. So yes, indeed, the most important question for us as a clinician is to, of course, to understand what would be the benefits for the patients. But first of all, just a technical questions, perhaps, because you said that that lifespan battery would be from 10 to 15 years, the lifespan battery, yes. How can you be sure of that? How do you estimate this? Because, of course, it's just an estimation.
Yeah, absolutely. So as everyone here knows, if you implant sacral neuromodulation devices into your patients, longevity greatly depends on therapy settings. So parameters like what you program a patient to in terms of amplitude, pulse rate, pulse width, whether stimulation is being delivered continuously or cycled, and also just how frequently patients interact and communicate with their device can play a role in their overall longevity. So the range of 10 to 15 years reflects those variables that I just listed off. For the 10-year longevity, that reflects a 1 milliamp amplitude patient with our default pulse rate and width settings. And then for anyone programmed lower than that, they can achieve longevities greater. So again, 1 milliamp, I'm sure everyone's practice, targets different amplitudes, I'm sure depending on anatomy and the patient. But at Medtronic, we've been working more and more to standardize lead placement and make sure that patients are coming out of the operating room with a well-placed lead where they can achieve those the efficacy at those low amplitudes.
So do not hesitate to ask your questions in the Q&A box. And I don't know if Stefan, do not hesitate also to interrupt if you wish to ask something. But we've got a very touchy question. So with all this innovation, how much does it cost? This is from the audience.
Yeah, I don't know how much depth I can get into there. I'm sure cost is dependent on geography. I can speak to, though, from an engineering standpoint, just overall development time and the trade-offs that we get into there. Of course, there are many years of research and technology development that goes into the decisions we make for which features we include in the system, and all of that comes at a cost just in terms of processes being developed, people being involved. But as far as actual system costs and device costs, I'd recommend you reach out to your Medtronic sales rep to get those exact numbers.
And of course, it's interesting in terms of MRI safety. I think that perhaps I can ask also Stefan if in his practice it will expand his indication and clinical indications to some conditions, to some neurological diseases, for example. I don't know, Stefan, if you've got, since this new systems coming, if you think about expanding your indications.
Yeah, I think there are two factors in the new innovation. I think the increased longevity may play a role. We all know that having to change a battery poses the patients to several risks. There is the anesthesia or the surgery. There is opening up the system, which means that you can damage, you can have a lead migration, so you can lose therapy efficacy, and there's the risk of infection, especially in patients also with a reduced immunological situation or in neurogenic patients. So that brings me to the other innovation, MRI, safety. And I think with that, we see in our center an increased number of patients with multiple sclerosis that undergo S&M, which was not possible in the past because they frequently need an MRI. So yes, I think with these innovations, we will have an increased patient selection, a wider one. And in neurogenic, I think mostly currently at multiple sclerosis. And it might be that we also will have a look to incomplete spinal cord injury patients. They sometimes require higher thresholds. So if we have a longer battery longevity or a rechargeable battery, that could also give an advantage for them.
Yes, I agree. And we've got also now more and more indication in deep endometriosis, deep pelvic endometriosis. Now the surgery has completely changed these last few years. And we see more and more, of course, people with urinary retention after surgery. And so we do not hesitate now to suggest S&M therapy, even though we know that in the literature that the percentage of success is about 40 to 50% for the tests. But since this patient is also have indications to have MRI also follow up, it is also interesting to have this MRI compatibility. But I've got a question from Jersey. Hi, Jersey. He's got a question about the magnetic power, because you say that it's okay for 3 Tesla. What about 5 Tesla or 7 Tesla MRI? Liliane, is it still compatible or not? Safe?
Yeah, so our labeling is focused on 1.5T and 3T scans. So that's where I would kind of limit the scan in terms of Tesla, but moving up to T5, T7, definitely something interesting worth looking into on our side, depending on, you know, the value it might bring to your practice. I don't know if either you, Professor Fay, or the doctor want to comment on whether that would be valuable or which situations that might be valuable.
Well, from my point of view, we don't have a higher Tesla in our hospital, so I don't have any requirements at the moment. And I'm not sure for clinical purposes if a T5 or a T7, if there are a lot of indications already. I know in research it can be an advantage to have a better resolution, but in clinical practice, I have to ask the neurologists for that.
I think it's very also interesting because, as you said, Stefan, for research, because we still don't know exactly how it works, the SNM system. But with this MRI compatibility, we can imagine really a functional imaging, exploring the brain area activation, and really to, at the end, to know exactly how it works. I mean, it's been now 20 years. It's still mysterious for some parts. So I think it would be really, really exciting to have projects, research projects on functional MRI and sacral neuromodulation mechanisms of action. We've got another question from Dimitri. So how much do leads efficacy decay over time in your experience? Perhaps this will be for Stefan.
I'm not sure if it's what the question means. If it's lead efficacy, then I have to bounce it back to Gillian to know if the lead, if it gets older, if it decays the transmission of the electrical pulses or not.
Yeah, from an engineering standpoint, definitely we wouldn't want to put a lead out there that doesn't provide continued efficacy over a long period of time or its lifetime. We don't currently label any lifetime for our sacral neuromodulation leads. We haven't seen, in terms of like material degradation or loss of efficacy, we haven't seen that as you know, a trending issue. I will comment that the design of the newer InterStim SureScan leads are designed to have, on average, a greater tensile strength than our predicate leads, so the 3889 and 3093, so that if you do have to replace a lead, maybe just because the patient wants MRI full body eligibility, or is getting a full system replacement, the lead tensile strength has improved so that you'll hopefully be not abandoning any fragments in the patient's body.
And Gillian, at the end, how many systems will Medtronic keep on the market? Because in France, for example, we have of course, the initial InterStim for those who were implanted years ago at the beginning, but we've got the InterStim 2, we've got the Micro. Will you keep on the market the current InterStim 2 with the InterStim X, or will you replace completely the market with the new system?
Yeah, of course, InterStim X is not a global launch, but since we're talking specific to Europe for this audience, the eventual plan is to move everyone to InterStim X. Again, a very similar system delivering the same, you know, therapy efficacy, the benefit being the improved longevity. So if we can give patients an opportunity to be in the operating room less with fewer revisions, that's our goal.
And when you want to change from InterStim 2 to InterStim X, do you have to change the lead also? Is it compatible or just?
The lead is compatible. So InterStim X is compatible with, I'll just list off the model numbers if anyone's familiar, but our latest SureScan lead, the model number that it's compatible with is 978B1. So that is the lead compatible with InterStim 2 as well. And then InterStim X is also compatible with the model 3889 and 3093 leads. So totally at your discretion, you know, depending on where the patient is in terms of age or whether they're really satisfied with the results they are getting with their, you know, existing lead placement. If you feel satisfied leaving the lead that's compatible with InterStim X, you're welcome to just replace the neurostimulator. Again, I just keep in mind or have that discussion with your patients about the MRI eligibility and knowing that the predicate leads would qualify a patient just to be head MRI scan only.
Can I add something to that, Veronique? I think, if I'm correctly informed, Gillian, that the microsystem is a different lead. It works on a different platform than the InterStim 2 and the InterStim X. And we have had patients that we, for certain reasons, needed to have higher stimulation amplitude. So the past, if we wanted to change them, we needed to place another lead, because for the rechargeable, it's a different one. But now with the InterStim X having also longer longevity, we can change them for the InterStim X. Does Medtronic plan to have an adapter for the electrodes, that a certain electrode can fit the other platform, or will they still be having just two separate platforms?
Yeah, so definitely something that we have heard, especially with the launch of InterStim X, you know, just deciding between, do we choose to continue supporting the lead connector spacing of InterStim 2 patients, which make up a large majority of the S&M market, or move to the smaller lead spacing that InterStim Micro uses. So before I answer your question, I'll just note that the reason for the change in spacing was so that we could accommodate the very small size of InterStim Micro. But it's definitely something that our development team is aware of in terms of, you know, having to choose what you implant before you get too far along in the implant procedure. And so as far as a connector in the works versus, you know, moving to a single header size in the future, I don't think I can comment on our plan to hopefully address those issues, but we definitely are aware that it is an issue, and in the future, we want to streamline and simplify the therapy for both you and patients as much as possible.
Because of course, when you can choose, you have the two different possibilities, but we have patients that were quite well tolerating a InterStim 2, so they will quite tolerate well the InterStim X, but they have had surgery to lose weight, and now they are very skinny, and it's still a chunky battery for them. So if we want to change them to rechargeable, we need to have a new lead, which could mean decreased efficacy. So that there might be a need, it will be a niche, but seeing the amount of patients that is losing weight, it can become a larger group in the future, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's a great point, and we see the need for it, and we definitely in the future want to be able to help simplify that without, as you mentioned, needing to sacrifice efficacy. I've spoken to patients who, you know, especially ones that are satisfied with their lead placement. They say, I don't want anyone touching my lead, right? I'm so happy with the results I'm getting. And we want to make sure that for years to come, you know, patients don't need their lead touched. and that it could be an easy swap out with just the battery. So I hear you, and I'll definitely bring that back to the team as well.
And Gideon, of course, neither Stefan nor me and the audience also, we do not have any experience with this InterStim X. And do you have, could you give us really feedbacks from clinicians from the US who implant the InterStim X, and also from the patients, because we could not find, many things, of course, on in the literature for the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So the great news is that the adoption of InterStim X in the US has really taken off. We received FDA approval prior to receiving CE mark approval. And so we launched a little bit over a year ago, actually, in the US. And the feedback to date has been really aligned with what I touched on in terms of clinicians are very happy to be able to offer their patients a rechargeable or recharge-free device where the patient's decision isn't based solely on longevity. Being able to offer them a closer comparison in longevity helps just, either reduce the number of features to keep in mind and hopefully accommodate patients so that they need to go under the knife less. So that's been the main piece of feedback that we've received from US clinicians. They're also very satisfied with, the familiarity that they already developed with InterStim 2 and even InterStim Micro in terms of programming, and how that carries over to InterStim X, not needing to learn an entirely new system to give patients an improved product. Hopefully that answers it.
And there is a question from the audience who asked, so Jersey asked if we can download data on the computer from the new smart programmer.
Yeah, so the app functionality is similar to what you would be used to already for InterStim 2 and InterStim Micro. So no major changes there in terms of downloading data or usage history to the computer. Either you or your staff or your Medtronic representative can help generate PDF reports, both in terms of usage and in terms of session, if you're interested in documenting changes that were made session to session. Those can be exported to a PDF and then uploaded to the computer as needed.
Perhaps some more clinical questions to Stefan. When you propose your offer your patients to choose between the rechargeable and the non-rechargeable system, how do you process? I mean, how do you proceed? Of course, we can tell them the advantages and the inconvenience of each system, but in practice, I mean, do they choose by themselves? Do you organize something to help them? Do you give some information leaflet to help them to choose?
Well, it's a very interesting question, Veronique, because usually patients, they cannot really estimate what it will be. I mean, we all have our iPhones or our smartphones, and we all forget sometimes a charger, so we know how it is. But for a device that's inside of you, it's much more difficult for the patients to decide. And actually, we don't want to steer that much. So for us, I think if you have a very slim patient, then we will point them a little bit into the direction of the smaller IPG, because we know from past experience that it gives them less bother. And then usually a little bit older patients, we don't go for the rechargeable one. And in the future, it will be much easier, because with the InterStim X, the difference between having a longevity of 5 to 7 years or 15 with rechargeable will not exist anymore. You will be able to say it's 10 years to 15 years. And most of the patients, they don't look that much in the future for their treatment. So I'm guessing that it will become much easier, and I doubt that a lot of patients will choose rechargeable. I think only for the slim ones, it will be a choice to make, and the others, I think, will go for the device that they are not having to worry about for 10 years or longer. What's your experience, Veronique?
I fully agree. You know, when the InterStim micros came, we were already we were happy with that, and we thought that 100% of patients will choose the system because it's just smaller. But our own experience that it's about 50-50, and all the criteria that we elaborate at the end. It's smaller, so it's good for the thin patients. He likes technology, so he will choose the rechargeable one. He is not compliant, so he will choose the other one. It's our criteria. It's not their patient's criteria at all. And so I think that for them imagine how they will do in their everyday life after implantations. So with the department, now we created a sort of workshops for patients where when we gathered 6 to 8 patients together in the same room to talk about the two systems, so that we can, of course, present to them the system with a Medtronic engineer, but also with a nurse, continent nurse, but also for them to exchange among them about questions. We realize that it helps patients to decide which kind of systems they would like to have at the end, to really exchange among other patients these difficult questions at the end. So we try to do that now for a year. And really at the end, they say, okay, now I know that perhaps I will be more comfortable with the micro. I will be more comfortable with the other one. It's kind of help that we...
It's a very excellent initiative. It's something to consider also in other departments. Really nice.
We've got a question from the audience. It's about... She said, how is the experience with ambulance surgery in other countries than Germany? From Verena. I think, Stefan, do you want to?
Yes, well, as some of you know, I worked for more than 5 years in the Netherlands, and there 98% of the surgeries of neuromodulation were done under local anesthesia. So more in ambulatory surgery, and it's doable, certainly, if you don't have to puncture a lot of times to find the foramen. And I think with the published standardized technique, it became easier. In Belgium, where I work currently, we do them all under general anesthesia, because the patients, they like it much more than local anesthesia. So I think it depends a little bit on the country. It's of course also the preference of the surgeon. For me, it's much more convenient to do it under general anesthesia because you don't have to worry about anything, so it goes much faster. But of course, if you have a patient that has problems to get anesthesia, like the more obese patients, we do it under local anesthesia, and it goes very, very smoothly. How was the experience in France, Veronique?
So of course, 100% of surgery are performed with the ambulatory setting, no hospitalization anymore. Of course, it requires some kind of organization, because you have to organize the clinics between the first and the second stage. So this requires, organizations with your nurses and with yourself. And in our experience, it's 50% under general and 50% under local. And it really works well. It depends more about the patients, about his anxiety of having a local anesthesia. We tried now to add, if we do it under local, of course, it's difficult to train young residents to do it under local, because first they have to learn the puncture, and then to know how to do, of course, the local anesthesia properly, which is another struggle. And now we add, some virtual reality masks to really to make the patients relax with the local anesthesia. And I must say that it's quite interesting because it's very well tolerated. That's why we decided really to do it either way, depending on the patient's anxiety. So, and to answer Verena's question, is 100% of ambulatory setting now. Yes, Josie, he said, okay, you can extract data to your computer, but what about the compatibility with Excel sheet? Because if you want to conduct a clinical research, can you have a database already set with that?
Yeah, so right now for commercial patients not undergoing any sort of clinical research, the only export option for those usage and session reports are PDFs, but it's definitely helpful to hear that potentially for a future update that Excel would be helpful for just keeping tabs in maybe an easier way.
There is a question from Jacqueline to you, Stéphane, specifically. So what's your opinion on bilateral sacral neuromodulation in your practice? Do you offer it to IPGs, to patients?
We don't offer it to our patients. I think that there is no evidence that bilateral leads work better than unilateral one. The only thing you have, if you put two leads in, then you have a high chance that one is well placed. And I think if you follow a standardized method and you only accept a good lead placement, then you only need one electrode. That's my opinion, but I would welcome yours also, Veronique, because I think in France there has been a trial of bilateral ones that you can comment on.
Yes. There was a randomized trial on that, and it was negative. So fully agree. I don't know if there is any questions. No. So one question to you, Gillian. So Medtronic now, we answers to our questions of MRI safety, of small implants, of longevity, of redo operation, etc. What would be the next innovation? Because of course, innovation never ends.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to hear from you all. I think we recognize, with our current systems, there's definitely room for improvement to simplify the experience. We talked about the lead compatibility. We recognize that the what we call proximal telemetry, so the communicator needing to be held within 4 centimeters of the implant, isn't always the simplest for patients. And so I think what comes next is, getting your feedback, continuing to gather feedback, from others on how we can improve the patient experience, how we might be able to, as we, live in a more data-centric world, leverage that data in a better way to improve therapy outcomes, efficacy, and just the overall experience for you and the patients. But yeah, I recognize that this talk is focused on InterStim X. We're just in the process of launching it throughout Europe, but we're definitely not stopping innovation at InterStim X. So there's definitely improvements to come. At least we hope so, and would love to, hear from this group about what might be helpful to see in a future system.
We're looking forward to, but after all, each country has its own regulation.
Yep.
I know that in France it's very tough.
Yes, and be very careful. Yeah, exactly.
I don't know when. Quite frustrating. And we've got perhaps you said it, but we missed it. I don't know. But Mariela, hi Mariela. Mariela, she asked how many patients have been implanted so far with the InterStim X in the USA. How many patients have been implanted? Do you have enough?
I think we're over 24,000 in the US, somewhere around there. Again, we launched around a little over a year ago, but we've seen great adoption of InterStim X from our US team.
So we're running late.
You can catch up.
Okay. There is another question from Jodzi, but I don't understand the question. It is a remote manipulation of the lead contact, transcutaneous.
I think what he means is for the next thing, Gillian, he proposes some things for innovation that you could do remote programming, so manipulation of the lead contacts, and also maybe a transcutaneous technique. That's what I get.
I see. Great, yeah, great feedback. Definitely see, we look to broader neuromodulation therapies also to see what they're doing, what has led to great adoption in terms of therapy innovation. So yeah, thank you for the feedback.
Any other question? We've got 3 minutes left. Because if no question, we will close the webinar. Steph.
Veronique, there was one question from Yvonne that we skipped a bit.
Yes.
I'm not sure if it's something we can discuss.
Yes. Sorry, Yvonne. Does anyone use sacral neurostimulation for bladder pain syndrome or interstitial cystitis? Personally, no.
If you ask the question, does anyone, when you look into the literature, you will see that there are centers that do it. It's, of course, an off-label indication. We are not allowed to do it in our country, but we can do it for urgency frequency. So if we have a patient with PPS that has urgency frequency, we can do it. And then you often see that the pain also decreases. But in our experience, it is not a treatment that will last as long as for the other indications. But yes, there are publications on interstitial cystitis and SNS, so people are doing it.
Yes, it's small series. And in France it's the same. We don't have it's off-labeled, of course. You cannot get any reimbursement for this therapy in these cases, so it's always under discussion with patients, and in my own experience we don't do that. So now I think that it was the last question. We will end here. So I would like, of course, to thank my colleagues and the panelists for the excellent exchanges and presentation on this new system. I would like to thank the audience for having been here. Sorry. Of course, I would like to thank Medtronic staff all these innovations, for organizing also this Euro webinar in collaboration with the ASU, so the European School of Urology. So thank you, Sabrina. Thank you, Christelle, for organizing this perfectly well. So see you soon. And Mercedes, Gillian, Stéphane.
Thank you.
For
Bye-bye.
many things to discuss about our practices. So bye-bye. Bye-bye, everybody.